If you guys watched the last couple videos, you know we installed a winch up front. We also installed rock lights up in those fenders. We installed these rock lights in the back here. We added whips to the rear rack. We also added rear tail lights. We added these bus bars, and we added this little strip up here for 4 relays. That's a whole lot of stuff that isn't wired. We're gonna fix that today. First order of business is gonna be to clean up all this wiring and get all these wires attached to the bus bar. I'm gonna start by labeling everything. That way I know what it is, because we're gonna start to get a decent amount of wires going up to both the positive and negative terminals here. How the negative battery terminal looks all put together. I got your main ATV cable there, the winch, then we got the light bar up front, and then the battery tender wire. So now that I got the negative side done, I'm gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing to the positive. The positive side is all done. Everything is in the same order as the negative side. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the relays mounted up here. And if you remember, I kind of destroyed the threads by welding these nuts on. So we're just gonna run a tap through all these and get our relays on. Yeah, so even I'm starting to think this is getting a little ridiculous. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 relays across the back of this thing. So yeah, it's gonna be worth it though. Before I get too involved with all the wiring, I'm gonna throw the battery back in, and then I'm gonna make my little leads that are gonna go from the battery to each of the bus bars, and then that way I can test everything on the 4-wheeler, just to be sure it all works and I didn't mess anything up, and then we'll get more involved with all the accessory wiring. This jumper I'm just gonna be making out of the same 6-gauge wire that I used for the winch. Hopefully that's gonna be enough. I mean, if it burns up, then I know I need to get a bigger, beefier wire in here, but we're gonna try this and see how it goes. Well, you guys, I made a mistake, but I think it was a good mistake to make. I originally thought I was gonna need all 4 of these relays, but now thinking about that wiring, I think I can get away with just 3 of them. I thought I was gonna need an ignition relay, but I think I can get away with the wiring using that ignition switch and just using 3 relays. Now this last relay all the way on the right is gonna be for this USB port. When I turn that key on, I want this to be powered. When I turn the key off, I want this to turn off. So that's what this relay is for. Now with the reverse lights and the rock lights, when I turn that key on, I want that power to be sent to a switch, and then I can hit that switch and turn on the rock lights, or another switch and it'll turn on the reverse lights. That way, when I turn the key off, if the lights are on, the lights turn off, or if the lights are off and I turn the key off, it's just not getting power to those lights. That way my battery won't get drained. So that's what these 2 relays here are gonna be doing. Now for all 3 of those relays, I'm gonna connect them to the battery individually, making sure that there is a fuse in between every single one of those wires. And then that way, when the coil's activated, it'll send that power to the device. If you guys are doing any sort of automotive wiring, there's a good chance you're gonna be using relays. They're an extremely useful component. So if you guys want me to make a dedicated video on how to use these and how to wire them, let me know down in the comments and I'll make a whole dedicated video to that. To connect the relay to the battery, I got these fuses off of Amazon. So pretty nice kit here. Comes with all the fuses you're gonna need. Comes with the fuse holder, which is also connected to 2 wires. So it should make wiring this up pretty darn easy. Of course, links down below. Kind of interesting, but when they manufactured these fuse holders, they just took that wire and looped it back into itself. So kind of nice, because then you get to cut it where you want it, and then you can have that little piece of wire be the exact length you need it to be. I'm gonna shoot to make this wire about the same length as these other ones. That way all these little fuse holders will pretty much be in the same spot. A USB port did come with its own fuse and fuse holder, but just for consistency's sake, I'm gonna be using one of these guys, and of course, gotta make sure it's labeled. All the fuse holders are made up. Now the rock lights and the USBs, the manufacturer recommends 10 amp fuses, so that's what we have in there. And then the reverse lights, I think I calculated that they'll be drawing around 3 amps, so I'm sure a 5 amp fuse would have been fine, but I threw a 10 amp one in. Now each one of these wires was just barely not long enough, so I did have to extend them. So I'm gonna run them up through the frame and connect them to the fuses. All these positive wires are now tied into our bus bar down here. So the next thing we need to do is ground all the coils. So going back to our diagram here, we're gonna be grounding out this 85, which is the black wire. That is the coil. So the coil is connected between 86 and 85, and that's what's actually triggering that relay. There's not gonna be a lot of current running through these wires. These are just activating the coils within each of these relays. So I'm just gonna take this first wire, tie it into the second one, the second one into the third, and then run the third down to our negative bus bar. All right, so we just completed 85, which is this ground here. Now 87, we're gonna leave disconnected, and that's gonna be the yellow wire, so we're gonna fold that back on itself just to get it out of the way. Before we get too far, I wanna be sure everything's working like I think it should. So I have my white wire here. This is basically the trigger wire, so when this gets power, it should output power straight from the battery out of this blue lead. So I'm gonna check it with the multimeter, just hook up one end of it to this blue lead, and when I touch this wire here, which is the white wire coming out of the relay to the positive terminal, it should give us 12 volts coming out of this blue wire. So let's see if that is true. Let's try that again. Yep, we're getting 12 volts. When I touch it, 12 volts. So this is working exactly the way I think it should. All right, so like we just demonstrated, this 86, this white wire is our trigger wire. So when this wire gets 12 volts gets outputted of this blue wire here, which goes directly to our device. But we're gonna work on this trigger wire next. There's a ton of ways I can wire this thing, but the way I wanna do it is when I turn that key on, it's giving power to my USB port, and then it's also giving me power to those switches for my rock lights and the reverse lights. That way, when I turn the key off, it kills all that, none of it can be on. That way, I don't have to worry about it draining my battery. If I have that key off, I know the four-wheeler is good to go. So what I need to do is I need to find the wire down in here with the main switch that when I turn that key on, it's providing power. And then I'm gonna use that power to power those switches and the relays to activate everything. Now looking at the wiring diagram for this thing, you have your main switch up here, and I'm not gonna run you through everything, but it looks like that red wire is always hot. And then there's a brown wire that's going into each of these relays. And I think that that's the one that when you turn that key on is giving us power. I'm gonna use the multimeter to test that out, but there's really nowhere to probe up into the wire up in here. But back in here for each of these relays, you can see that brown wire going into them, and a little part of that metal clip is sticking out. So I'm just gonna test that out by sticking my probe off the multimeter in there. And if I turn that key on and off, that should be giving me 12 volts and not giving me 12 volts. All right, so I got the probe touching that brown wire in the relay. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick on the key. And there you have it. We got our 12 volts there. Turn the key off, cuts it, turn the key back on. We got our 12 volts again. So it looks like that brown wire is the one we need. I have everything laid out about where I want it. I have my two switches here. These are 5/8 holes. I have a regular drill bit for that. And then I got that USB port, which is gonna go right here. And that I have a hole saw bit, so hopefully I can get a nice clean hole out of that. And then the backs of those switches are just gonna sit right about in here in this empty space. So hopefully once all that's on that little cover there, I'll be able to slip it on no problem. I don't know guys, eyeballing it might have let me down. Let's get one shot at this. Wish me luck. have a feeling this is gonna make some of you guys pretty mad. This thing looks pretty good, pretty happy with it. Let's see if it fits. So you might notice that these clamps are off because things are pretty tight, and I don't know. I just kind of eyeballed all this and it seems to be hitting this little dash piece here, but I might be able to finagle it in like so. I don't know if that's gonna work or not. It looks like this switch here is in the way. I don't know, guys. Eyeballing it might have let me down. Looks like this one switch is still hitting that bracket. So with this cover fully seated, those switches are actually in a good spot, but I don't know how I'm gonna get this thing on and then get those plugs plugged into the back of them so they're actually wired up. So I'm just gonna start wiring it, and then we'll figure out how to do that later. And then worst case, we might have to get a new one of these plastic covers and find a better place to put these switches, but let's just get to wiring. All right, so I've been doing some thinking, and I think I need to run 4 wires from these relays up to that control panel switch area. I need to run 3 white ones. Those are gonna be my trigger wires. So that's what's actually gonna tell the relays to open and close. And then I got 1 blue wire, which this is gonna be sending power up to that USB. Now the other 2 blue wires, I don't have to worry about just yet because they're gonna get ran to the rock lights, which that control module is gonna sit back here. And when the other one's gonna get ran to the rear lights. So all that can take place back here. So I'm gonna go ahead and run those 4 wires up and start wiring up those switches. So everything I'm running is 14 gauge, which is overkill for what it's gonna be powering. But it's always better to overspec your wiring than it is to underspec it, and this is just what I had lying around, so it's what we're using. Got my 4 wires ran up here, 1 blue and 3 white, and I just numbered a couple of the white ones so I knew what was what when I come back here. That just saves me from having to ohm them out and figure it out myself. So I'm gonna wire up each of these white wires to the 3 white wires on the relays, and then that blue wire is gonna get wired up to this last relay here. This is the USB relay, and then I can just start tidying up the wires and getting them nice and tight and running them all the way to the front, and we'll deal with that slack later. Well, I completely forgot, but I do need to ground out that little USB port thing. So I ran a black cable along there, and then all the devices, so that USB port and all the lights are gonna get grounded back to this bus bar here. So that's just what this wire is. I'll tie this up into the bus bar, and that's gonna be the ground for that USB port. The USB hub has the positive and negative wire hooked up to it now. Now this is the trigger wire for the relay, so I'm gonna hook this directly into the brown wire. That way when I hit the key, it's gonna trigger that relay and turn this on. So I'm gonna do that and we'll test it out. So this is right. Hooked up the battery, so in theory, if I turn this key, this is gonna kick on. Oh, yes. Look at that, 12.4 volts. And when I kick the key off, beautiful. All right, so now we get to wire up the switches. I don't think this will be too bad. So I'm gonna go with option 1 here, and that is basically saying that when that switch is not pushed in, the light on the switch will be off and the rock lights or rear lights will also be off. And then once I press that switch in, both the switch light will be on and the rock lights or the reverse lights will be on. So in order to start this off, we have our green wire, and that's our common wire, and that needs to be hooked up to the battery. So that's actually gonna get hooked up to this brown wire here. That way when the switch is on, this is giving power to the common wire on our switch, and when I turn it off, these switches will not be able to be powered. So I'm gonna tie these common wires into the brown wire on this end of the plug. That way I can unplug it, and this will kind of be all together, and that way I can remove this cover if I ever need to in the future. Green wires are now tied into the brown wires, so the common's done. Now the blacks, I'm gonna ground to a screw that's kind of holding on that dash. And then the blue and red wires will tie together, and those will get tied into each of those trigger wires for the individual relays. Moment of truth. Let's see if all that was worth it. I hear the relays clicking. Pretty confident in the way I wired this up, but just to double check, I'm gonna hook this up to the reverse light. So this is the further back switch. There you go, 12 volts. Turn it off. And then we'll test out the other switch. So this is gonna be for the rock lights, and this is the switch further to the front. 12 volts. Should be good to go.